We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Winners and losers abundant on the GOP primary presidential debate. Who got the scores, who advanced their cause, and who didn't? Well, we'll be discussing all this and so much more on today's episode of Liberty Nation Radio right here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. Let's dive straight in and find out just which riders are set to win the GOP race.
Who won, who lost, and ultimately, does that even matter when it comes to the first GOP 2024 primary debate? Now, we're aiming for fireworks on today's show as we have with us the He Said, She Said dynamic duo of Lisa K. Donner, editor-in-chief of LibertyNation.com, and senior political analyst, also longtime host of this here show, Mr. Tim Donner. Yes, they are married, and I believe that will add a beautiful element of political friction to today's panel. Thanks for both being here.
What makes you think people who have been married 37 years have friction?
Eyes and experience, Lisa.
Well, we don't disagree about everything.
Not everything, but politics tends to be that issue that rubs people the wrong way, as it were. So let's start. I mean, we all watched the debate, and we've purposely avoided discussing it amongst ourselves before the show. So I think we should have some fun reactions here. So let's start with who we thought won the debate. Who was the biggest winner? Let's start with you, Lisa.
Let me just say, I think that's maybe not the best question. I think the best question is who advanced their cause the most?
Sure.
Because this is a group of, also rans. These are people probably vying for president, vice president, unless something, drastic happens to Donald Trump. So I think the person who advanced themselves the most was Nikki Haley, because she came off as a pragmatist. She came off as someone who is strong. It never hurts to invoke the words of Margaret Thatcher when you're a woman in politics on the conservative side. She seemed like an adult in the room without wearing it on her sleeve. And whereas Vivek as in cake, I have to keep reminding myself, he seemed a little too green. He was attacking people, and somebody called him a smart aleck. I thought there was a little bit of arrogance and hubris in his voice, like, he's 38 and I've got a few years on him, and I sort of felt like this is a guy who hasn't been knocked around enough to be president.
Okay. Tim, what's your take?
Well, I think that Vivek helped himself probably more than anybody, because he came from such a, basically ground zero in terms of name recognition. He had certainly vaulted himself into contention for the number 2 spot recently, putting a little bit of pressure on Ron DeSantis. And yeah, he was a little, Vivek seemed a little bit over-caffeinated, shall we say. But at the same time, he made very profound points in very few words. He's mastered the art of the soundbite, and his closing argument was brilliant. He covered more ground in less time than anyone else. He fed the necessary red meat to the Trumpists, and, America first folks in the crowd. And it seems like that was the majority of the crowd, which you could tell by the reaction to Chris Christie and his harsh criticism of Trump. But I think Vivek Ramaswamy helped himself more than anyone, because he was a presence, and he refused to back down from the taunts of career politicians who had their guns trained on him. And why shouldn't they? He's the rising star. He's the new kid on the block. And he showed Tim, he wasn't going to be pushed around.
Tim, you made a good point about the sound bites. He's mastered the art of the soundbite. But it is kind of interesting to put them all on a debate stage, Mark, I think, because finally we get a little bit more than the soundbite. And I think he does shine when he's doing the soundbite, like Vivek. But the problem is he also shows all his minor points.
I see where you get there, Lisa.
Where he's not experienced.
That's exactly the same criticism as I recall being leveled at somebody back in the 2016 presidential primary debates, and that was
And two,
Donald Trump.
and don't forget 2008 with Barack Obama. He was also a guy who, in 2008 wasn't, when the first debates were probably in 2007, wasn't well known, had a chance to introduce himself to the country.
He didn't seem to be channeling Barack Obama as much as he was channeling Stockman. What's his name? Stockdale to me. Who am I? Why am I here?
Admiral Stockdale.
Admiral Stockdale.
Yes. Well, yes. I mean, but he had to do that, and yeah, it was as you and I discussed, Lisa. He was a little bit hot for a cool medium, but he had to make an impression. Better to be too hot than too cold. When, as you say, people only get one chance to make a first impression, and Vivek's was to come on very strong. But I also agree with Lisa, Mark, that Nikki Haley established herself as someone who I think would be able to pull back into the fold some of those frisky, fickle suburban women who find Trump to be just unacceptable because of his personality. I think she could soften things a bit and provide a level of, experience, and the sense that Haley kind of cuts a swath right through the middle of the GOP. She can deal with Trumpists. She could also deal with establishment types. She is very articulate.
Go ahead, Mark.
I'd like to disagree with both of you on Nikki Haley. Now, I have a lot of time for Nikki Haley. I think she's incredibly smart. She's incredibly driven, and she's the kind of a person who, if she was in the position of vice president or even president, would be a force to be reckoned with domestically and on the world stage. I'll give her that. But I felt that she was really putting, especially from a foreign policy point of view, which is really her area, right? That's her ground game, is the foreign policy. She was kind of putting it that rather than anti-foreign interventionism, she was saying that was essentially isolationism, which is something that I read in the left-leaning outlets quite a lot, and also something that I put down in my article on libertynation.com that came out directly after the debate. She was using a lot of sound bites that you literally do find in Salon, for example, when it's talking about the abortion question. She was saying, we can't have unelected justices deciding our policy, which completely ignores how Roe v. Wade came into being in the first place, and also said about how we shouldn't be looking for the death penalty for people who've had an abortion. And I checked this out before writing, and that was literally from a Salon article. So she's really parroting these things that are not, to come back to Tim's point, they're not for the MAGA or the Donald Trumpian supporters, which I believe, and I might be wrong here, but I believe that they are the largest group within the current Republican voter crop.
Mark, let me just say, I think you're looking at this a little differently than Tim and I are looking at it. I think you're looking at her actual policies. I'm not saying I agree with her policies. I'm saying she advanced her cause more than I think almost anybody else on that stage, because she came off, it's tricky for a woman, as someone says, they have to come off as strong but not witchy. And
they have to do everything a man can do, but backwards and in high heels, right?
Yeah. In the words of Ginger Rogers, I think, or no, that was in the words of Faith Whittlesey, as I remember it correctly. But anyway, bottom line is, I don't agree with Nikki Haley on a lot of her policies, and you make excellent points about her policies, but I think she did advance her cause. Whereas somebody like Vivek
rhymes with fake and cake and shake.
I think throwing bombs like all of you are bought and paid for is silly.
That was too severe.
And I think lost in this whole discussion has been Ron DeSantis, who I really felt badly for, because I think he struggled with the forum a little bit. I think he's a little better one-on-one in an interview. He tried his best, and I think he is the doer in the group. He will do what he says, but his communication skills were just a little bit off last night. Sometimes he was a little too hot, sometimes a little too cool. It's hard to find a middle ground for him.
After this short break, we're going to come back, Lisa and Tim, and discuss who were the other hot contenders on there. I really would like to pick up back on this Ron DeSantis question when we get straight back. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.